In today's Prime Focus, we're talking to the people who are most affected by today's ruling, students. Bumio Misere is a student at Duke University, and Alex Shieh will be attending Brown University in the fall. Thank you both for coming on the show. Bumi, I'd like to start with you. What's your reaction to today's ruling?
I can't say that I'm surprised given the current Supreme Court that we have, but I do worry about what getting rid of affirmative action means for the diversity that we see on campuses, especially schools like Duke University and Brown. People that look like me, who are underrepresented minorities, typically don't find themselves in these universities, and I'm afraid that that's going to be a trend we see continuing in the years to come.
Alex, you have a different take. What are your thoughts?
I think this ruling is a win for America. I think that America, fundamentally, one of our core tenets, which is in our Constitution, in our 14th Amendment, is that we don't treat people differently based on what race they are. And that's essentially what this Supreme Court decision says, is that colleges cannot treat students differently based on the race. And I think that's the right call. I think that's fair, because I genuinely don't understand why a student's race should be a factor in the admissions process, because I think that there are so many better characteristics that we can use to judge students.
Alex, I want to push back for a moment there, because you said we don't treat people differently based on their race. Do you think that that's the reality in America today? Do you think that people get all treated the same despite their race?
Well, I think that obviously there are disadvantages that some people face. And I think I heard the president's speech earlier today, and he was talking about how still, even though this ruling happened, colleges can still consider a student's economic background, the school district that they went to. And I think absolutely those are things that we should consider, because you're absolutely right that in the past there has been systemic racism, which has held minorities back. And so I think as a result of that, we should absolutely be considering a student's circumstances and how best they were able to capitalize on the opportunities that were accessible to them. And I think that absolutely is appropriate.
Just one more question, and it's a yes or no here. You said in the past there's been systemic racism. Is that to imply that it does not exist today?
Well, I think it depends. I think that affirmative action is, in a sense, systemic racism, in that we're treating students differently based on race.
Bumi, for students whose education was impacted by racial inequities, they might now have to write about their experiences in their essays because they aren't allowed to reveal race on the application. How do you think that that'll impact future college applicants?
I would say that it's going to add another layer to the systemic racism that I believe is very, very alive and well in America, and in college admissions, it's no different. When we think about underrepresented minorities, Black and Latino students in particular, I think that by forcing these students, if they wish to have their race considered, to write about these racial challenges, traumas, and discrimination is making their race the forefront of their identity, which is not fair to these students. And I would also say that there are many, many different factors that a student cannot control that are still being considered in college admissions.
Bumi, just want you to react directly to what Alex had to say, because he said he doesn't think that we should treat people differently based on their race when it comes to, well, in general, but also in particular here when it comes to college admissions.
Well, I would say that I think many people who have been the victims of systemic racism, like myself, would be very, very clear in stating that race and racism is still very, very alive today. And I think that by this ruling, we're going to see more people who look like me unable to get into these schools, not because they aren't good enough to get in, but because these campuses may not be able to maintain their diversity initiatives as well as they could have when affirmative action was still allowed. Even just the idea that it cannot be marked on your application, but it can be deeply and very descriptively written about in your essays makes no sense to me. If we're allowing students to talk about their race, then why can we not allow these students to check a box about their race when they're applying?
Both of you applied and were accepted to universities that did consider race as a factor in their admissions. I'm curious about how that consideration makes you feel. Alex, we'll start with you.
Right. Well, I think obviously I'm a little bit uncomfortable knowing that I got into Brown and that somehow or another my race was a factor. I think that personally, I want them to judge me for Alex, my individuality, and I want to be able to portray myself authentically. And I wasn't able to do that.
Bumi, your thoughts?
I would say that I am glad that in a holistic admissions process, my identity, and part of that is my Blackness, the first thing that people see when they see me, was included in my application. And you know, the thing about affirmative action, as we've known it, as Alex and I actually went through, is that by virtue of Supreme Court precedent, it was only to be considered amongst a host of other factors. And so I just feel sad for my underclassmen that are still in high school who won't get to be known by that all-encompassing part of their identity, which, whether we like it or not, in America, race is part of your identity. It's not something that you can separate yourself from.
Bumi and Alex, really appreciate this academic discussion. No doubt it's going to be going on in classrooms and homes for weeks, possibly years to come. And we appreciate both of your insights and both of your perspectives tonight.